Dr. Rebecca Hardcastle is an extraterrestrial contactee from childhood. She has taught courses on the extraterrestrial reality. She is a pioneer in the study of consciousness and extraterrestrial contact. She worked with the famous astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell in establishing an Exoconsciousness Institute, and she's here today on Exopolitics Today.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, it's my pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Hardcastle, or let's just keep it informal, Rebecca, to Exopolitics Today.
Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. Well, I'm truly fascinated by your work on this exoconsciousness topic, and you spent some time working with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, who was also very interested in this field. But let's start from the beginning, just so that my audience gets to know a little bit about you. How did you get interested in this field, and what happened in your childhood that influenced your kind of life direction?
I'm a childhood experiencer. My earliest memory of my contact was around the age of 3, which is really quite normal. Many contactees, about 3-4 years old, they have their first conscious memory. However, there are crib contactees who have a different, and people who come in who made contact before they came in. But I personally was a childhood contactee. It's gone through different phases, but I've remained a contactee for all of my life and still work to this day with extraterrestrials. I had a sort of a varied, I guess I would say a varied contact as a child. I lived in a very small mining community in Clarksburg, West Virginia, a very tiny town. And I had actually simultaneous contact of being almost like a child shaman, where I was under the ground working with beings and having that feeling of being under the ground and then coming back out of the ground, and then simultaneously working with beings that were in another dimension in space, and being on the craft as a child. But I knew even as a child that those two dimensions, that somehow the beings and the dimensionality were all connected, and I was just as a child just experiencing these different dimensions, and led me to, I had a lot of freedom as a child. Small town, people could go where they wanted to go. As a child, you just was a safe place to be raised. And so I was out and about a lot, and therefore had a lot of contact, not only in the house and in my bedroom at night, but also I had quite a bit of contact. I would say the majority of my contact was during the day as a child.
And what type of beings were contacting you? And was it what we would call a contact experience or an abduction experience?
It was definitely a contact experience. However, we need to clarify that anytime a child experiences something, they're not going to have the critical analytical abilities that an adult would. Like, oh, this is happening. This is so strange. For me, I was so young that it wasn't strange. It was just how I lived my life. So I never felt like I was being abducted in any sense, but that I was kind of I guess you would say, a traveler in these different dimensions as a child, and that I was safe and everything was okay. I was never really hurt. I went to, I guess what you call, at least you, I think, called it Star School. So I went to Star School on the craft. I learned a lot of things, and was given a lot of information about technology, about humans, about the work I would do as I matured, and as I as I grew and matured, people would come into my life and I would recognize them as, oh, they would even sometimes come to me and say, I was on a craft with you. And I would resonate with them. But also there was a time in my life, probably in my mid 40s, where a lot of, so I got married, I went to school, I got married, I raised children, I had a career. And then about my mid 40s came a time when many of the things that I was taught as a child revisited me, and they came back and were almost doing an upgrade and felt like an upgrade because there was a lot of download connected to it, but also just a revisit of some of the things that I had learned as a child during my contact. For example, there was a lot of orbs during that time, a lot of visitation from many different beings were coming and visiting me. And there was a lot of orb activity. So these orbs would wake me up, and like at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd be like awake. They'd be pulsing in my ear, kind of like a dolphin does. And they would wake me up. I would sit up in bed and I would look up at this. I'd be kind of directed to look up at the ceiling. I would look up at the ceiling, and they would push down these 3-dimensional symbols as if to say, okay, remember these symbols. We're upgrading you, and we're reviewing what it is that you're going to be working with, and you need to recapture and remember that information. And it was during that time when the word exoconsciousness actually came to me.
So, pardon me. So you had a career, and then at some point you began to research or write about exoconsciousness. So, what was the transition? When did that happen? And what was your career in?
So so I have a master's in philosophical theology, and I was an ordained United Methodist minister. I was a chaplain at Wright State University, which, ironically, as you know, in our world, we know, right next door to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They were next door neighbors. And so I worked there for about 15 years, and that was a great job. I did a lot of counseling. I did a lot of programming. I did a lot of work with professors, and there was freedom during that era. It wasn't so locked down, and the university wasn't as corporatized as it is today. So there was a lot of room to maneuver and to learn, and we had a medical school and a nursing school, and just the school was built from the ground up to be handicap accessible. So I had students in my programs that went to school in a bed. So it was really quite revolutionary. So people were that was a very revolutionary university, engineering wise. What we're seeing today in terms of sort of the transhuman agenda of putting electrodes on people and having them get up and walk through it with a computer. Back in the early 80s, we were doing that at the university. The handicapped students were getting up, and one woman walked down the aisle in her wedding, another woman walked to graduation. And so many of the professors subsequently got very jealous of that, as happens in academia. And he left, and the program was shut down. I didn't hear anything about it until, just within the last, 5 years or so. So you began to see this movement of technology and consciousness opening and possibilities being explored, and then suppressed and kept down until the timeline was permitted to allow them to move forward. And then I also worked as a career counselor and a therapist. So I did all that work, but it's been a seamless. I still do therapy. I work for a functional MD here in Scottsdale, Arizona, Dr. Ronald Peters. So I've kind of, I do a lot of exoconscious coaching, working with psychic people. who are unsure how to integrate and expand their psychic awarenesses. I run coaching groups, and I also work one-on-one with people.
Mhm. Well, what you did teach a course on extraterrestrial reality at Scottsdale Community College in what was that, 2005? Was it?
Yeah.
So, what happened? I think there was you had an interesting experience with that, teaching that course, which of course at the time would have been, quite pioneering. Very few courses have been taught, and even now are taught at universities on extraterrestrial reality.
So that was a funny happenstance. I was actually had a job in PR at the time. So I was a single mom for about, I don't know, 10 years, 10 plus years. So I kind of moved around in the job market, made sure I could raise my children. And I was working at a high school that was also a college, a secondary, post-secondary school. And I worked in PR. So I put together a curriculum to teach extraterrestrial reality, which primarily was the study of ufology and craft sightings, as well as different experiencers in the history of what they experienced. And so this was before email. And so I had a list of all of the fax numbers of all the press, because I was in PR. And so I just shot them all out of fax. And within a few days, I was on every morning and afternoon news show in Phoenix at the time. And my class filled up with people. And almost all of them were experiencers. And we had a great class. And someone wrote a letter to the president and complained about it. And so it was subsequently shut down. It's very interesting, though, because so I knew how to write curriculum. I knew how to do PR, and those things came together. But a group of people who were very prominent in ufology at the time, I had told one of the people that I was going to offer the course, and she gathered from, Sedona, Tucson, of these people that were all really big in ufology at the time. And they called a meeting and had me come to the meeting, and they were like, you can't teach this course, period. And I'm like, well, why not? And, I'm going to teach the course. And they said, you're a mother and you can't teach the course, and horrible things are going to happen to you if you teach the course. And well, I went ahead and I taught the course. I said, I think I'll be fine. I'm going to teach the course. And at that time, a man at Oberlin College in Ohio was putting together a UFO educators group on Facebook, because Facebook had just launched about that time. And I think there were maybe 4 or 5 of us, one woman in the UK, a man at Oberlin, and myself, and maybe another person or two were the only people that were actually teaching ufology at the time.
Well, it's very interesting that you came up with the concept of exoconsciousness, and that your first book was written in 2008, Exoconsciousness, Your 21st Century Mind. So maybe now, just explain to my audience, what is exoconsciousness?
Well, to go back to my time when I was describing the orb activity and the activity of the beings that had ramped up when I was in my 40s, I was reading a lot at that time. I was researching, reading. I was a single mom. Every spare minute I was reading and researching. And so one morning, I had one of those alarm clocks that are radios, and the radio went off, and I'm like, oh, I just can't get out of bed right now. I got to pack lunch, get kids to school. I got to go to work. I need a couple more minutes. I hit that snooze for 5 more minutes to rest. And this word, exoconsciousness, came in my body. It didn't come in as a thought. It came in as almost like a vibrational, like a logos word. It's kind of like when they talk in the Bible, they say the word became flesh. That's what happened to me. That word exoconsciousness came in my body, And I knew that from that point on, that was to be the concept that I was to be working with. And so, Michael, you were the first person that asked me to come and with your Exopolitics Institute, you were really you were pioneering in and bringing forth an academic approach to these concepts that were coming out of ufology. And so you reached out to me and asked me to write an article on exoconsciousness, and I did. And that was really the first time with you that I began to put it together. And so that definition of exopolitics is more academic. It's more about the study of the extraterrestrial dimensions, abilities of human consciousness. And today, I have a much less academic, more practical, grounded definition, where I define exoconsciousness as the innate. So every person has it, the innate human abilities to connect, communicate, and importantly, co-create with extraterrestrials, multidimensionals, and importantly, spiritual beings.
Okay, that's a very important concept right there, that there's this innate ability to connect with and communicate with extraterrestrials and interdimensional beings. So, I mean, is this something that is kind of like equal? I mean, to me, it would make sense that, starseeds would have that ability in spades, whereas those who some people would describe them as kind of like earth seeds, that earth is their primary or first kind of like physical incarnation in this reality, that for them, extraterrestrial life is something strange and even scary. So would it make sense that starseeds would have a high degree of exoconsciousness as opposed to those who have not incarnated in other worlds and have memories of life on other worlds?
I think there's definitely a spectrum about it, but also, well, just a couple things. I think if everyone can expand their five senses, so they can become very aware, sensory of height and touch, certainly height and hearing, height and smell, height and awareness of the environment around them, and they can call that the sixth sense. And they can take lessons and teach themselves to do that. Now, in terms of remembering former lives or being a starseed, life on other planets, I was a certified hypnotherapist, and I've done a lot of hypnotherapy in my life. And once you start to work with people, I certainly don't have any scientific evidence to back this up, but it's my feeling that humans have a soul, humans have a spirit, humans have a field around them that they're working with. So when COVID stays 6 feet apart, well, they're kind of actually saying there's something about you that goes out 6 feet from where you are. So, once you get people aware of that field, everybody begins to tap into this exoconscious part of who they are, and they tap into memories. It could be many lifetimes lived on Earth, but I think all humans have this. Certainly, starseeds and contactees are easily. Me being a childhood contact, was it easier for me to deal with this? Absolutely easier, because it's just something that goes with you throughout your life. And people that begin to have encounters in adulthood. So I run something called Exoconscious Coaching that people come into. They're small groups, 8 to 10 people. And it's very interesting. People will join the group, and we'll talk about childhood experiences. So we kind of move it chronological through childhood, adulthood, that sort of thing. And then we talk about a lot of topics around that, like discernment. But just on childhood, people will come into the group and they'll say, oh, I have nothing to say this week. I couldn't answer any of the questions, because it's a very structured coaching. I couldn't answer the questions. By the time probably a half an hour's over, 40 minutes is over, they're there with their hand up saying, oh, I just remembered something. So part of this is that humans haven't had the context or the opportunity to access this part of themselves. And once that becomes available, then a lot is possible that hasn't been possible up to now in human civilization. In many ways, just to go back to, I mean, historically, Martin Luther, he kind of cracked open the Catholic Church when he said priesthood of all believers. Like, you don't need a priest. You don't need to pay the priest this money. It's you can be a priest. And all of a sudden people were like, oh. And I think it's the same thing with exoconsciousness. We're at this point where disclosures being talked about in the media and in books and people like, you and your work. And this is like, you can be exoconscious. You are exoconscious because you are a human.
Well, in terms of, I understand there's a difference between exopolitics and exoconsciousness studies, that exopolitics deals with, institutions, individuals, people or processes that deal with extraterrestrial life, and exoconsciousness is working much more with that kind of consciousness aspect of all of that. So in a way, it's very embracive. So I wonder if there's a degree that one can have, a greater exoconsciousness ability than others. Like what I'm thinking of is a lot of people that I work with. Well, let me give a good example. Tucker Carlson, for example, and I think this was based on Dr. Gary Nolan told Tucker Carlson about it 10 years ago. He said that he was working with pilots or he was working with Air Force officials or individuals that came into contact with extraterrestrial technologies, and they would suffer brain damage. That there was something about their consciousness which just couldn't handle this advanced technology. And other people, contactees, easy peasy for them. They just go up and they can interact with it. There's no problem with them. So what is it? What is it that causes some people to have a violent physiological reaction to interacting with extraterrestrial technologies, and other people it's natural and easy?
I think that's true. I think part of it is there. So go back to my therapy, put my therapy hat on here. I would say they're acting out of fear. They're also acting out of the way that they've attached to Earth. So they've probably, I'm a big proponent of attachment therapy, obviously. So they attach to a person that's struggling with it has attached to Earth with a certain delineation of beliefs of what reality is. This is reality, and these are the back boxes and categories, like you were saying, institutions, figures, that sort of thing. That makes the building blocks of our civilization, and they're very attuned that those are the only blocks they're going to play with. And then when a new block is introduced, it's a very, very traumatic thing for them. And this is one of the things that we work through in our coaching, because many of the people, for example, one of the women in our coaching, she was working with nanotechnology, a very scientific profession. And all of a sudden, this contact came to her, and immediately her first reaction was, I'm going crazy. I'm crazy and I can't tell anybody. I certainly can't go to my physician or my pastor or my therapist and tell them what I'm experiencing. They won't have any context of it. They'll think I'm crazy. And she lived with this for many years, trying to figure out, am I crazy? Because it wasn't just one contact experience. It was a continuing contact experience that didn't let her go. Like an initiation, very, very similar to initiation. So adult experiencers often have initiations that are extremely traumatic, just like these pilots experienced. Once you get them to settle down and begin to integrate that experience, now she's to the point where she's remembering things in her childhood that she had totally blocked off from her memory. So exoconsciousness is so important because it covers that subjective piece that's inside of all of us. A part that we can access and use, a part of the wider cosmos and universe. That's why I wrote my second book, How Exoconscious Humans Guide Our Spacefaring Future. We're becoming not only a technological civilization, but we also are becoming a spacefaring civilization. And we're going to need the abilities that exoconscious people possess and have refined and worked on. And once again, it's like anything that's traumatic. It could be a person that had believed in, I'm going to be married for the rest of my life, and then they get divorced. That's just as traumatic. I think it's just another traumatic experience that people have to settle down and integrate and trust themselves and know that there's this reservoir of wisdom and abilities inside of them that then when they get in a community of other exoconscious humans, that's what we call ourselves, exoconscious humans, that then they can begin to blossom and learn to use these abilities inside of them.
Okay, maybe there's that potential within everyone to be able to access these exoconscious abilities, but practically speaking, some people are able to excel in exoconsciousness. Just as some people, everyone has the ability to become a great long distance runner, but the athletes who do run, that become the champions in that, I mean, they have that natural ability where they can just do that, and it's so I think, some people have these abilities to a far greater degree, and they are the ones, of course they stand out, excel in sports or music, in every field. But when it comes to extraterrestrial technology, I think, and I'm sure you probably agree with this, that there's a lot of extraterrestrial technology that has been discovered around the world, that governments are in a race to find these technologies, to interact with these technologies, understand them, and reverse engineer them. And some people are natural in interacting with those technologies, and other people, they experience severe trauma or reactions, and so they can't do it. So I think there is a need for understanding what in particular that differentiates some people who can interact with ET technologies from others. So what I want to present to you is a theory, and see whether you agree, is that I suspect that has something to do with gamma brain waves. And I say that for certain reasons. So there's an image I just want to show you of the different brainwave states in that humans have. And what I found from there are two particular individuals who have been part of the secret space programs, and they have both said that the secret governments, are looking for people who excel or are able to operate with high gamma brain waves. So I'm wondering if that is what the distinguishing feature of exoconsciousness is. People who have naturally high gamma brainwave states, they are going to excel when it comes to exoconsciousness. So I'd just like you to maybe elaborate, or tell me if that's in the right direction. What your thoughts are.
I think that holds a lot of truth. As I said, I've worked a lot on, studying mind control, working and also being hypnotized in hypnotherapy, accessing all these different brain states. And I have to admit, I mean, the first time I picked up a hypnotherapy book, it's like a self-hypnosis book. I was just like, oh, I can do this. I did it automatically. I did in like 2 seconds. And I was just able to go into those altered states incredibly quickly. And some people need to go to classes to get to a theta state or even to a delta state. They need to go to class. My issue, and I just also want to add, and I've written about it also, is I worked for several years. I was able, here in Scottsdale was a man named Lee Gertis that runs a company called Cesaret, but it used to be called Brain States Technologies. And he's done a lot of work in actually balancing and healing the brain through different frequencies, and very, very successfully. And I'm just also aware. So I'm very, in terms of the neuroscience aspect of it, in terms of going to these different altered states aspect, yes, I'm in agreement. And also I would add that exoconsciousness is more than the brain. So in my third book, Exoconscious Humans, Will Free Will Survive in an Increasingly Non-Human World, I began to take apart what was going on with the brain state, with the brain studies that were done by the government. That was actually started by Bush in the 2000s. He had a brain initiative, and then Obama's brain initiative picked it up and went a little further because we've been successful with the DNA initiative at that part. And I talk about that in the book. And consciousness is, so going into altered states of consciousness is also about moving out into the field of consciousness. That is our brain and our nervous system, which is highly important. I would say as important as knowing how your brain reacts to something is knowing how your nervous system reacts to something. And maybe you can go to a gamma state, but your ability is hampered because your nervous system hasn't been in tuned and balanced enough so that you can actually sustain a gamma state, which is very important to me. Also laying on that is the aspect that our consciousness is that ability to go to these different states and then move into consciousness beyond our brain. And how to do that. And that takes practice, and that takes dedication, and that takes years of learning of how to do that. And I would add a third aspect to it that is very important to me now, and that's plasma science. I think plasma science is going to be a foundational science that will kind of overlay a lot of the neuroscience when we come to understand our body. So 99% of the universe is plasma. It's not solid liquid gas like we have here on Earth. It's plasma. Plasma is intelligent. Plasma is an intelligence that we can communicate with. That is, in some cases, there's what's called the Great Sloan Wall, which is a huge plasma wall out in the universe, 137 light years away. And yet we are affected by it. So by its presence of plasma, we have to say, well, maybe Einstein's theories need to be tweaked a little bit to fit into this new awareness that we have of plasma science. But if we take that down further and we say that our DNA has a plasma aspect to it. So I think part of this is not just understanding the brain and the brain states, which is important, understanding the fact that our nervous system has to be aligned with these abilities that we bring forward, that we are also dealing with beyond the brain, information beyond the brain. And then fourth, we're dealing with plasma science here. We're dealing with the plasma that is the plasma properties, the crystalline properties that are actually in our body.
Okay, that is fascinating. So the brain is, and the brainwave states are a critical factor, and this consciousness aspect of connecting to ETs or something outside is something that people can achieve in different ways. So I'm just trying to think of a practical way of maybe explaining this. So for example, let's just imagine there are people that do a lot of meditation, and they claim this thing called universal consciousness or cosmic consciousness. Like in the Indians, the Hindus, they call it Savikalpa Samadhi, or some kind of samadhi, nirvana for the Buddhists. So where they achieve this universal consciousness. So what is that? I mean, is that an example of exoconsciousness? Because what's happening to the brain? I mean, what's the brain doing? For someone who's experiencing this kind of cosmic consciousness, what's happening with their brain? What's happening with their awareness?
I think, I don't know this for a fact because I'm still a student of it, but I would think that this oneness factor, it's a thread. So the experience of oneness is a thread that moves through almost all exoconscious humans. They talk about the experience. It's very visceral. It's very real to them. And I think where they're moving to, and I would say it's very holistic, because your brain has to be attuned in terms of states of consciousness to go to this oneness, which is, of course, what the yogis teach. But your nervous system has to be attuned to go there. And I think that's why they do yoga. They do yoga to attune their nervous system. I do yoga to attune my nervous system. That's how it works. That's one of the tools. But if you have meditation without the active participation of attuning your nervous system to live in this different dimension, I think it's increasingly difficult. That's why they talk, this is holistic. This is holistic work. And this oneness that they may be encountering may be God, and then you're talking theology. It's so funny. I was a philosophical major, and it's so funny. Things come up, and people are talking about different aspects of exoconsciousness, and what they're really talking about is theology. And whether it's the church fathers or the theologians or the Islamic scholars or the Quran, or whatever, scholars of every religion, they've been writing about this for centuries. And furthermore, the century-old writings all talked about plasma, and they called it ether. That God was in the ethers. And we took the ethers out during the Age of Reason. We didn't want to talk about ethers anymore. We wanted to make sure that science had the grip on everything. And Edgar Mitchell was always fond of saying this. He said, 400 years ago, we made a split, and science got every facet of study, and the church got consciousness. They left consciousness with the church. Well, what did the church do for it with 400 years? They didn't do a thing with it. They did nothing with it. And so now it's this time where this convergence is happening, because people are finding that they can look into these ancient, not ancient, but centuries old writings, and these theologians and of many faiths had a concept of what the ether was, and how there was a oneness there, and how they were participating in it. And they thought about it, and they lived into it, and they explored it. And we stopped exploring it. We stopped exploring it 400 or 500 years ago. We just stopped.
Well, I remember reading some books about the early contactees, and one in particular really got my attention. That was Howard Menger. He was having these contacts with human-looking extraterrestrials, and he described how at a certain time, after interacting with them a certain number of times, having contact, he started spontaneously teleporting. And he described his teleportation experiences, which was very, very interesting. I kind of kept that in the back of my mind. And then more recently, I've met and got to work with another contactee, a French contactee. His name is Jean-Charles Moyen, and he's also an extraterrestrial contactee, and he has this ability as well to teleport. And it's kind of like it just switches on and off. And this seems to be an ability that is in some way related to contact. So, when people have contact experiences, what kind of abilities come online? I mean, teleportation is one. Are there other abilities that come online with contact?
It's interesting. I wrote an article I wrote a part in Ray Hernandez's survey that he did for free. Remember the Beyond UFOs book, where he researched, I know, 3,000 or 5,000 people across the world, and one of the big answers that came up was that with contact comes enhanced psychic ability. Other things come with contact, but enhanced psychic ability, whether you teleportation, telepathy, kinesiology, spoon bending, all of these are the ability to like rejuvenate your cellular body and kind of younger. All of that was attached to contactees. And that's one of the reasons when I work with Dr. Mitchell, I wrote that booklet about our spacefaring future, because if something goes wrong on a spacecraft, and we all know that computers go wrong and they break, but your telepathic ability doesn't break. You still have that. And you still have that communication ability, or your teleportation ability doesn't break. You always have that to come back to. And it's interesting in the space program, everything is based on it. We have to enhance the technology so that we can do it. But there's never even a glance and we have to, move space travel to robotics. But there's never a glance at the fact of maybe advanced humans who are literally advancing themselves through contact, that they may be better suited to space travel than someone that goes to the astronaut program. Because if things go wrong, they have a set of skills that remain with them and don't go offline.
I think that's a very important point, and that's kind of like one of the things that emerged with this individual, Jean-Charles Moyen, that his ability to teleport. He actually was hooked up to a brain wave device that would measure, and it was shown that when he was simulating the teleportation experience, that it was the gamma brain waves just kind of like popped out, that his gamma brain waves were like through the roof. And this was something that was scientifically tested. So it showed that the gamma brain waves are what is triggered when an individual starts to exhibit some of these advanced abilities or exoconsciousness abilities.
That's fascinating. And also, I think the whole, I think exoconscious humans are going to redefine what we think of as space and time. And that has an impact on teleportation. If you're working with a different concept of space, your ability to teleport through it may become something that's more effective. And the same thing with time and time travel and what exactly is time. So these are actually all issues that we talk about in exoconscious coaching and in our groups. And people are, there's something about being in a vessel that's holding you, a coaching vessel that's holding you, or a one-to-one vessel that's holding you, so that you can think about these abilities that you have and come to a peace with it. For example, missing time. You've been in this field a long time. I remember years ago, missing time. Everybody was so scared of missing time. It's like, oh my golly, I had missing time. I don't know where it was, Vinnie Barney Hill, whatever. And now for contactees, for what I call exoconscious humans, missing time is something that we work with all the time. That sounds like a tautology, but it's something that we work with, and it's an ability that we have. We have an ability to refine and make give a plasticity to time that humans have never been able, in my knowledge, maybe some, Himalayan guru maybe, or someone locked up in a monastery maybe, but the normal everyday exoconscious human to be able to live differently in space and in time, that's big. That's a big leap for humanity.
Well, that's a very interesting, this idea of a normal exoconsciousness human, because I would argue that exoconscious humans are anything but normal. And I would give an example of that. There's a individual by the name of Stephen Chua, who was recognized as someone with these exceptional abilities in the 1980s, and actually was recruited to the Prime Minister of Singapore's office. And the Americans, the US covert ops out of Area 51, they recognized him as having this exceptional ability to exhibit these gamma brainwave states. So they flew him over to Area 51, and they got him to test fly a modified F-15F. And they said, we want you to interact with this machine because a lot of our pilots are having problems interacting with it. Because it was a reverse engineered fly-by-thought technology that they had modified. And the pilots, they had some pharmaceutical product to stimulate gamma brain waves, and they were suffering severe brain traumas. Whereas Stephen, because of the high gamma brainwave, he could fly this modified F-15 effortlessly, even though normal American pilots were suffering brain injuries. So, he to me is someone with this exceptional exoconsciousness ability. So I would not consider that to be normal by any means. That people who have that ability, they're special, and that the governments are looking for people like that. So you want to comment on that?
Well, number one, I think the government knows who every contactee is. I mean, let's not mention words about that. Edgar Mitchell did not tell me this, but he did tell a good friend of mine who is also a contactee, Susan Manwich. She talks about it. She said something to him about, do they know who we are? And he said, oh yeah, they know who you are at birth. They track you for the rest of your life. So to think that the government or these programs don't have people identified, and you don't even have to do anything to be identified. You are identified. So I think that, number one, let's get that myth out of the way. I have a problem because I do feel like exoconscious humans are a pathway into our future, and bringing it down to the point of, so I'll give a good example of it. So there's a woman in our institute, Nancy Duterte, who is an attorney, and she's never been psychic. She calls herself the skeptical psychic because she was never psychic. And she questioned it, and she thought it was, not scientific. And so instead of questioning it, she decided one day that, well, I'll just teach myself how to do it. And now she's an amazing psychic doing readings. She invented a new type of remote viewing called TSP. So we're looking at to think that this is only special. Well, yeah, an opera singer is special too, but there's a lot of opera singers. Maybe a couple are better than others, but this thing of taking people and acting like they can't raise the bar of their abilities. I guess for me, this is the important piece, is that all humans can raise the bar of their abilities. Are some humans endowed with contact and special abilities within contact? Absolutely they are. And I want to also enhance that. But I also want to say that if we deny right now with disclosure, if we deny with disclosure that only special people are exoconscious, then we've just put everyone else back into the prison. That's all we've done. And that's accomplishing nothing. It's like during the Reformation, some people decided they wanted to be a priest and they were going to go on their own and they were going to think for themselves and be a sovereign moral human. And they went down that road and they did it. And other people just went right back to the church. And that's okay for them too. All I'm saying is that we exoconscious humans have a message about the fact that we are a community. And if you want to learn these things, and if you want to get better at these things, naturally, some people are just like the two people you cited. They're naturally better at this. It's like, I've raised kids. Some kids are like athletic. It's like, oh my golly. Some kids are like brilliant at math. But don't deprive them. Don't deprive humans of the opportunity to lift this barrier of consciousness, because I really believe that exoconscious humans, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, my last book on exoconscious humans, was because I was living in DC at the time, and people kept dropping information on my lap about transhumanism. I didn't know about transhumanism. They kept dropping information to me about it. And this was probably back, I don't know, 2012, 13. And, when you're in DC, so you're around a lot of research and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, as a mother, I got this thing in the pit of my stomach. I'm like, well, wow, if this transhumanism is real, then like, what about my children? And what about my grandchildren? And what about my great-grandchildren? What about the human race? What's going to happen? And so I began with my book to actually juxtapose a future of transhumans. What would transhumanism look like into the future? And then I juxtapose, what would exoconscious humans look like going into the future? Now, are a lot of people going to be transhumans? Absolutely. But at least there's an option there. At least there's a path that people can follow to really refine who they are. And some of this, Michael, is really caught up in self-esteem and self-belief, which is a psychology. And then you kind of get into mind control programs and the whole, the mind control programs coming out of Tavistock and the Macy Foundation. A lot of this work was to keep humans like infants, so that we never break out of really living into our abilities. And that's what my work's about. It's like, break out of this mind control, live into your ability. Maybe you do telepathy better than somebody else. Maybe you bend spoons and move structures around. You know what? If you're on a spacecraft and something's going wrong with the spacecraft, and you have kinesthetic abilities, and you could bend metal with your mind, you might be useful.
Well, yeah, definitely. And that's a very good point. I think your most recent book, I think that's a very important topic, actually. Contrasting exoconscious humans with transhumans, and what's going to be happening in the future. And obviously the transhumans will have technology inserted into them so that they could more easily interface with and control and manipulate these advanced technologies, many of which have been reverse engineered, and the exoconscious humans will be doing it without technology, but through consciousness itself. So I guess many of the things you've been saying are kind of like lay out a roadmap for how it is you can become, or our children can kind of like enter into this future of space travel, interacting with extraterrestrials and their technologies without going down this path of having some technology hooked up into your organics.
A very important thing that I discovered was, I was writing my book, was I learned a lot about cybernetics and computers, and how cybernetics set up closed loops that you can't get out of. You just stay in the closed loop all the time. It's kind of a mind control technique also. But the other thing I learned was that to simplify transhumanism has three aspects to it. The first aspect is geoengineering, and we're certainly seeing that with weather modification, with CERN, with HARP, all of those environmental artificial changes that are with chemtrails that are happening in the world today. So you take that layer of engineering, you combine that layer with genetic engineering, and we've all seen that through genetic engineering through the the mRNA vaccine, and genetic engineering with CRISPR technology, and with new drugs that are coming out. They're all genetically engineered. So you could also genetically engineer through geoengineering. So you could spray the vaccine on the plants or in the sky. So they're all connected. And the third engineering is social engineering, and that's just plain old fashioned mind control. If you're an experiencer and you haven't delved into the reality of mind control and the programs that are there, and the experimentation that's been done on how your mind thinks, and if you don't have enough background fundamental knowledge of social engineering that's especially happening in your cell phone every day when you pick it up. I walk into yoga class. It makes me laugh. I walk into yoga class 10 minutes, 15 minutes before class. Everybody's sitting in the yoga position. Guess what they're doing? They're on their telephones. They're not calming their body. They're not checking in with their nervous system. They're living in this social control, this socially engineered reality. And the thing that I realized about it was how absolutely comprehensive it was, and that these three pieces just kept interlocking with one another. And the social engineering, stand 6 feet apart, wear your mask, that's all social engineering. That would work with the genetic engineering, which would work with the geoengineering. So it's almost like when science got nanotechnology, they just exploded. The possibilities just exploded for how to control humans. And it's nothing but a control system, pure and simple. And what it does is, as more of these call them implements, get put into our human body, our plasma human body, then what they do is they disrupt the natural flow. So they'll disrupt the natural flow. And that's why these pilots were having trauma, because working with these different types of gamma technology, because once the implements artificially are put in your body, then your meridians don't work, your chakras don't work, your astral and etheric and mental body isn't functioning as one, because you've got things stuck in you, and it's damming things up. And so we have a real commitment to natural human consciousness, because we've only scraped the surface of what humans can be, of what human consciousness can be, what the human physical body can be. We just scraped the surface, and now we're ready to stick things into us and change our, CRISPR DNA before we've had a chance to even know the incredible abilities that we have. And a lot of this information is part of hooking up with the cosmos and galactic light and galactic life forces. Once these implements are inside of us and inside our bloodstream, inside our neural system, inside our DNA, I don't know that cosmic consciousness is going to be as possible.
I think that's a really critical point that you made there, because it explains why, going back to that example I gave of this Singaporean super soldier who was able to interface with this mind technology, interface that had been installed into one of these modified F-15s. He was able to naturally interface with it without any problem because of his high natural gamma brainwave activity. That's right. He called it fly-by-thought technology. It was reverse engineered from ETs, but that the normal Air Force pilots, they didn't have that natural ability, so they were given a pharmaceutical product that they weren't told to like meditate, connect with your higher self, develop that higher consciousness, or develop that connection with universal source. They would, like the shortcut, typical shortcut. Here's a pill. This will induce that gamma brainwave, but it didn't work because the pill did induce the gamma brainwave, but they still suffered severe brain trauma. And so, I think you're absolutely right that there is this need in developing this exo-consciousness that you have to be able to connect with this kind of deeper level of yourself and with the universe.
I think many experiencers have the feeling. I mean, I have the memory. I have the memory of driving the craft. I mean, I think that's a kind of a common memory of experiencers, especially childhood experiencers. They have a memory of their consciousness driving the craft and kind of that oneness with the craft and that sort of thing. So I think it's very common. There's going to be one of the things that we need to be thinking about, especially, well, just look at Dean Radin. I mean, Dean Radin worked for Edgar Mitchell's Foundation, Institute for Noetic Sciences. He spent all those years researching people and meditation and people who, had different psychic abilities and putting that all into a database. And now he's working for a group called Cognogenesis that's going to go in and go in the back of your neck and insert CRISPR technology so you won't have mental illness anymore. Change you genetically so you don't have mental illness. It's one of the fastest growing things in technology today. It's genetic medicine for mental illness.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a topic that I think is very significant for what's coming, and I'm sure you discussed it in your book, Exoconscious Humans. Artificial intelligence. I mean, how does artificial intelligence constitute a kind of crisis or opportunity for exoconscious humans?
I think artificial intelligence is great. I mean, you want to make a big database and you want to run an algorithm. Sure. That's a useful thing to have. But interestingly enough, I mean, I just heard someone the other day was talking about, so we all use Amazon. We buy our books from Amazon, and there's a well-known author in Nantucket, and someone had written a review of her book, and it got turned down. It was a negative review. It was like a 2-star review. She's a very, very popular author. And so he rewrote it. He said, well, I'll make it sound a little nicer, but still 2 stars. Sent it off, still got rejected. And he started digging around and found out that their algorithm did not allow this author to receive any negative reviews. So, it's this whole thing that we're living with of, AI is going to bring us equity and everybody's going to be equal, when it's the absolute opposite. Everybody's not going to be equal. There's going to be so many shenanigans that that's what AI is for shenanigans.
Well, I know AI can be used for things like controlling ships, spacecraft.
Yeah.
So
Well,
some
I think
extraterrestrials,
it's got like great applications.
use it for guiding their ships, but others they just interface with their consciousness. So
Right. The navigation is in your consciousness. I mean, I knew that as a child. I'd look at these rockets, rockets going off, and Elon Musk putting red cars up in space, and I'm like, this is a joke. This isn't real. No, this isn't. So yeah, I don't know what's to come, but it just seems to me like, if, especially in disclosure, because you and I have worked in disclosure for many, many, many years. I took the path of saying the government's not going to give it to us. It's like a handout. The government's not going to give you a handout. So I just figured that I would go the path of individual humans that have had contact, and have that be the path that I worked on in disclosure. And it's very interesting. So if you look at who's fronting disclosure right now, they never bring experiencers forward. And any of these, UFO hearings or certainly the congressional hearings, experiencers are never brought forward in those, ever. And even somebody like Grush, I mean, it's not, he wasn't working on the secret programs. He just knew somebody that said they were working on the secret program. So there's always this absolute barrier between who really knows the information. Probably if you bring somebody in that worked on a secret space program, they would have different things to say about it than what we're being fed through the machine. It's just like if you bring an experiencer forward, they're going to say different things. They're not going to have all the propaganda and the sensationalism and then the wow factor. And, they're just not going to, because if they're exoconscious, they've integrated that, and they've lived with that, and they've worked with that. And they don't buy in. That's just mind control.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to just kind of come back to this idea of artificial intelligence and how it connects to exoconsciousness, because I know Elon Musk made a big point of saying that artificial intelligence is a threat, is a long-term threat. And we can see why artificial intelligence is a threat in terms of it kind of like taking over human society and, kind of like more or less imprisoning human creativity or humans, some kind of matrix like contraption, versus transhumanism. Musk thought transhumanism was the way in which humans could be technologically enhanced to deal with the AI threat. So if you replace transhumanism with exoconsciousness, would that be sufficient to deal with this possible threat that AI imposes, where it could literally take over society, and unless we're very, very careful, before we know it, we're kind of like marginalized in these little ghettos because everything is controlled by AI.
We may well be marginalized into ghettos. It's not going to be a ghetto of my own making. But I think for Elon Musk to say AI is dangerous, but transhumanism is okay. Well, transhumanism is AI. It's like, that's the same thing. Yeah, that's, I guess what you're talking about is, so just to be transparent here. So when I was in Washington, D.C., I was collecting research to write the book on exoconscious humanisms about transhumanism. And people were telling me things, and I would research. And Michael, I was so traumatized for so many years about this subject of transhumanism and AI and these different types of engineering, geo, social, genetic, so traumatized by it that I couldn't write the book at all. And then as life would have it, we left Washington, D.C. and I came to live in Phoenix, and we ended up moving twice in Phoenix. So every time you move, it's very disruptive, and you really have to pay attention to getting your boxes packed and whatever. It's very hands-on activity. And so by the time I landed in our home where we live now in Phoenix, I had really somehow my body had worked through the trauma of transhumanism, and it no longer lived in me. And I was able to write the book. So when we have leaders like Musk spinning these prophecies, it really traumatizes people. And I know that as a therapist, that once you get traumatized, and one of the reasons that I was able to work myself out of it was because I had to move and work to actually move to Phoenix, to actually move from Phoenix, from an apartment and then to a home. I had to move. And one of the biggest things about trauma is that we get frozen, and we get frozen, we need to move. So my advice to people today, that if they're feeling like they're afraid, if they're getting overwhelmed, if all of these prophetic announcements are coming through, many of which are propaganda, that they just simply need to move. They need to go for a walk. They need to go cook. They need to go take care of their kids. They need to get their body moving and move themselves through this self-inflicted trauma. Because what does AI want us to do? They want us to sit in front of our telephone and be frozen. Be frozen in front of your phone, flipping from one thing to the next. And that's how they capture you. And that's how they just re-traumatize you again and again and again. And then we come to issues like frequency. So there was a program in Purdue University in Indiana called the Sentient World Simulation, SWS. And it's been around for a while. They were making avatars of individuals, and probably by now they have an avatar of everyone in the world. So when COVID came, what did everyone in the world do? They gave the pharmaceutical industry their DNA. They had that thing stuck up their nose, okay? And they gave their pharmaceutical world their DNA. So now you have another overlay of sentient world simulation, where we not only have your avatar of who you are, things that we can scrape off the computer about who you are. Now we have your actual DNA. So now we have your frequency. And now that we have your frequency, we can beam trauma to you via that frequency, and only put frequency into Michael Sala's DNA or Rebecca Hardcastle Wright's DNA. We can selectively traumatize. And this is social engineering combined with genetic engineering. So the navigation of what we're going to be moving through to keep ourselves as healthy, vital humans, that's one of the missions of the Institute for Exoconsciousness and Exoconscious Humans, is how we as a community can move through this and actually find the opportunities. Because one thing you need to realize, whether it's AI or whether it's a computer or whether it's an aircraft, they break. Things go wrong and they break. And it's up to us to figure out how we want to maneuver with that. How much, I've got a cell phone. That's what I'm willing to accept, and make the choices from there.
So how do you feel about the future? Do you feel optimistic? Do you feel pessimistic? What do you think is going to happen as we move increasingly into this non-human world that you wrote about in your last book?
I'm increasingly optimistic, but it's one of the most important aspects of exoconsciousness is that we co-create with extraterrestrials, multidimensionals, and spiritual beings. So some people come into our group and they've they've not had contact with an ET. They've had contact with Jesus, or they've had contact with Buddha. So they've had an overwhelming initiation of a spiritual experience. So it's always important for us to say that there's a commonality there in terms of contact, in terms of knowledge, in terms of what they're able to access, in terms of these different layers of reality. So we as exoconscious humans believe that we're not alone in this, that we as humans, always coming down to the humans. So humans hold the primary responsibility for moving humanity through this times into the future, into creating our future. But that we are going to be co-creating that future with access to extraterrestrials, multidimensionals, and spiritual beings who are also participating in our reality, who are also here with us, and we are co-creating our innovations and inventions and opportunities with them. I spent 6 years working with Dr. Mitchell on 0-point energy, like trying to launch 0-point energy initiatives in the United States and find funding for it. And we were doing it a three-pronged approach, very holistically. We were working on 0-point energy. We were working on consciousness as connected to 0-point energy. And we were working with extraterrestrial presence. So I spent about 6 years working with him and his team of international scientists on that. And then when he passed away, I was part of the WikiLeaks. Our meetings with Podesta were also included in the WikiLeaks, so people can look that up. So after he passed away, I came back here to Phoenix, and with the Institute for Exoconsciousness, I started working with people like Susan Manwich, who had also been working with 0-point energy over Unity devices, trying to bring those into the public arena, into the public domain. So my feeling is that if we exercise and support the innate exoconscious ability to co-create within our community, that we'll be the ones that will bring forth very, very significant, not the only people certainly, but we will be a community that brings forth incredible innovations and inventions during this time, because we understand consciousness and we understand the presence of these beings around us and how that links to technologies that we will bring forward, which will be very different.
Okay, all very important. So for people that want to dig deeper or learn more about this, where would you recommend they go, Rebecca? Why don't you tell them about your website,
Okay,
about your courses, books?
so my website is exoconsciousness.com, and that really has pathways to explore all aspects that we've talked about today. Books that I've written, the Exoconscious Coaching, the Institute for Exoconsciousness, and we've got some very, very exciting things coming up in the next few months. Maybe we can talk about that when we get that online, Michael. But my personal commitment is to bring these exoconscious inventions forward and these innovations, and find a community strong enough to support it and willing to support it. Because I think this is the future that we're creating.
Well, I think it's a fascinating field. I think anyone interested in extraterrestrial life and technology is going to be fascinated by how we can train or prepare our consciousness to interact with these technologies and with the ET life. And so I think people would be kind of well advised to visit your website and to buy your books and kind of dig deeper into this phenomenon, because I think this is what's coming towards us, the entire planet. So I want to thank you, Rebecca, for coming on to Exopolitics Today.
Thank you so much. Love being here.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Sala. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.